came after the funeral. They folded the flag for him at the little brick church on Ellsworth Avenue, and the wind tried to take it twice before the honor guard's hands persuaded it to behave. It was a raw Thursday in late January in a river town in southeastern Ohio, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than sense. The man in the casket was Eamon Ridge, a volunteer firefighter and the sort of neighbor who shoveled 2 extra porches without mentioning it later. The service ended at 4, the last handshake landed at 4:20, and by nightfall, the street had gone back to being only a street. At 9:13, Leora Penn took her seat at the county dispatch console, slid on her headset, and watched the board come alive. At 9:31, the line marked 911 flashed with a familiar number. His number, the man everyone had just buried. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Leora had fielded storms and barn fires, and wrong turns called in as kidnappings. She had coaxed calm from people whose words came like hail on a tin roof. She had heard the first breath of a baby through a phone held in shaky hands, and the last breath of a stranger who needed someone to hear it. She was 34, kept her hair short to keep the headset from snagging, and wore a gray cardigan because the room ran cold to keep the computers honest. Her desk held 2 photographs wedged into the bezel of the monitor. One showed a river in summer, green as a promise. The other showed Eamon and his daughter Cass standing in front of the station engine with that look people get when duty gives them a reason to grin. The year was 2022. The county had upgraded the system, and the board pulsed with the soft light of new money that still felt like a borrowed suit. Lines identified towers and cross streets. Repeat callers had little tags. When Eamon's number flashed, it wore the tag she had put on it a year ago, Station 4. Her stomach made a small, foolish turn. Her hand did not. She tapped the line open. 911. What is your emergency? Static, not empty. The kind of static that carries weather in its mouth. A faint hiss like tires on wet asphalt far away, then a click as if someone had covered the microphone with a thumb and lifted it again. Leora glanced at the automatic location box. The system offered a circle that could have been a dozen blocks wide and no more. The tower showed the bluff above the river. The timer on the call rolled past 10 seconds, then 15. The headset warmed in her hand. "Hello," she said, voice even, the way training turns fear into architecture. "If you can speak, I am here." Something moved under the static. A breath, slow, disciplined. The way firefighters learn to breathe through a mask like they are rationing the ocean. She had listened to Eamon for years as he called in traffic stops and barn smokes and mutual aid requests in that unshowy voice he kept, even when the ceiling thought it was tired of being a ceiling. Her throat tightened without permission. The board did not care. It kept time. The night supervisor, Brandt, rolled his chair closer, not touching her cord. He was 50, part-time philosopher, full-time keeper of snack drawers. His eyebrows asked a question he did not give words to. Leora tapped a note onto the incident log with deliberate fingers. Caller number displays as decedent from earlier funeral. Open line. Faint audio. Possible misroute for memorial device. Possible spoof. Monitor. "Eamon," she said quietly, because sometimes names open doors the way keys do. "If you can hear me, give me any sound." The line breathed once more, then found a voice. Not bright, not ghostly, a man speaking like someone who had walked all day and only now remembered he could sit. It said one sentence, 3 words, patient, back door locked. Brandt's hand hovered over the radio mic. Leora nodded once. He paged Station 2 because Station 4 was morning, and Station 2 would show up with their coats half buttoned and their hearts arranged like a team. He sent them to the Ridge home on Quint Street, the small white place with a porch swing that had never let a guest feel foolish for needing to sway a minute. Leora kept her voice on the line. "Back door, locked," she repeated, writing it, hearing it, feeling the way the sentence wanted to be a map. "Is someone inside?" Nothing answered at first. Then a second sentence, softer. "Cass asleep." Brant's fingers were already moving the way piano players do when the song makes them want to be faster than they are. Officers on the midnight swing shifted their routes without complaint. The medic crew out of town angled their rig toward Quince in case Grief had found a trick that needed medical names. Leora sent a quick text to the on-call clergy liaison because the county did not believe in letting families be alone with what they could not name. "Amen," she said, "steady. We're sending them. Stay with me if you can." The line hissed like rain on a steel roof, and then went quiet. Not the click of a hang-up, the kind of quiet a room makes when a story finally sits down. The call timer rolled to 1 minute 23 seconds, then stopped. Disconnected, the board told her, cheerful as a toy that believes its work noble. Brant opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for his coffee and decided it was the wrong kind of night for coffee and reached for water instead. Leora sat very still for a moment and felt the way adrenaline stands up in your body and refuses to sit until you give it a task. She gave it the task of listening. The lines danced with ordinary need. A possum in a kitchen. A husband who had cut his hand on a jar. A neighbor who had heard a window break and then realized it was the television. Her hands did their work. Her ear held a room for the line that had gone quiet. Officer G. Park radioed in first. Voice crisp. Tires crunching on salt in the street. Unit 3-1. Quince Street. Back porch light on. Back door indeed locked. Copy request to knock. "Copy," Leora said, hearing her own voice make simple shapes. "Proceed." There are knocks that sound like questions and knocks that sound like the start of a fight. Officer Park knocked like a person who has played in a string quartet. Firm, meticulous, willing to wait between knocks. Leora heard the long, thin silence on the open radio channel that means everyone has decided to breathe in sync. A porch swing creaked, whether from wind or memory. Then Park again, softer. Visual on subject in living room. Teen. Asleep on couch. Television on mute. No visible distress. We are making entry. Park called the locksmith number taped to his visor, because there is always one, and he also called the small cheat that officers inherit, which is to lift the back door on its tired hinges when you turn the key the wrong way. The door opened, a floorboard confessed itself. Park moved through a small kitchen that smelled like heat and spice and thyme. He said, quiet as a blessing, "Cass, it's G, it's me." The girl woke with that rough sound grief makes when it has only just let go for half an hour at last. "Back door," Park said into his shoulder mic. "Locked, now secured." Subject breathing, oriented, tearful, says she fell asleep and forgot the back after the last aunt left. She says her dad would have said it. She says she heard him say it sometimes, even when he was alive, when she forgot. "I'm locking up, then staying here until her aunt returns." The call had been the little bridge a county makes when one house cannot manage all its doors alone. Leora typed. She logged, she breathed. She answered a call about a siren that would not stop on a fire alarm panel, which is a call that can ruin a night or return it to its usable shape. She told Brant she needed 30 seconds, stood up from her console, walked to the stainless sink by the break room door, and washed her hands as if she had been in a kitchen that required respect. At 10:48, the line lit again. Same number. The board did not know how to feel about that and chose its usual indifference. Leora took it. 911. A voice lives inside a headset after a while. The nerves learn routes, the body decides where to keep the sound. The phrase came through low and clear. Basement. Pilot light. She did not hesitate. She sent the fire crew already on Quince next door. She told Park. She told the aunt, who had come breathless from her own house 3 blocks away, that they were going down the cellar stairs for the little square of flame that keeps a winter from doing more harm than good. She heard Cass in the background say, without fright, he always listened to the furnace like it was trying to tell him a joke. Engine 3 called in. Pilot light out. Gas smell minimal. Windows open. Relit. Carbon monoxide monitor registers safe. A firefighter Rowe, who had once done stand-up for exactly 2 open mic nights, and then decided his comedy belonged in the bay with his coworkers, added gently, Whoever called this in has good ears. The board calmed, the town kept its little noises, the river told the ice what to do, and the ice obeyed or not. Leora's shift slid past midnight. At 1:19, she poured tea she did not want and drank it because warm things are a kind of law. At 1:40, an old man reported a woman knocking on his side door asking for a light, and she sent Park and his partner again, and it turned out to be a neighbor who had locked herself out, and they laughed about solutions and did not mention grief, so it would not be tempted to take that house too. At 2:19, when the dispatch room feels like a lighthouse that forgot whether the bay is wide or just an eager creek, the line lit a third time. Leora did not say amen out loud. She let the humanities teacher voice in her head that once told her names have heft say it for her. 911. This time, the sentence was longer. Not elaborate, not difficult. The kind of sentence men say when they've spent their lives making tool lists. Check the pan on the back burner. Leora's fingers moved before she could tell them to, and 10 seconds later, Park said on the radio that a pan of oil sat glowing on the stove, forgotten by a cousin who had come bearing food, and then wept, and then gone to call another cousin and set the phone down on the porch rail. Park killed the burner, slid the pan onto a cold eye, and said, "Tell whoever's on that line thank you again." She said, "I will," and understood how inadequate that was, and also how there is no better sentence at 2:20 in the morning when a house has been held upright by 2 extra words spoken by a man with no air left to push them. By dawn, the calls had slowed to their usual winter trickle. The board made its little satisfied beeps, the shift change crept near. Leora printed the overnight logs for the lieutenant in charge and set them in the bin with the neatness of a person who believes paper is a form of kindness. She took off her headset, set it on the hook, and let her neck decide it had been a stiff night. On her drive home, the river looked like a sheet of hammered tin under a sky that had not yet decided whether to blush. She stopped at the corner store for milk and oranges. The clerk rang her up and asked if she had been at the funeral, because everyone had been at the funeral, even if they had not parked their bodies in a pew. Leora said yes, and the clerk said he had known Eamon since they were boys, back when the river took 2 boys and gave back 1, and how the one who came back had never raised his voice again, unless it was to make a frightened kid laugh in a smoky basement. Leora listened. The clerk put 2 extra oranges in her bag, the way men do when they feel the night reach its hand into the room and cannot keep all the light from leaving. She slept until noon and then sat in her kitchen with the radio low and the blinds open to teach the afternoon how to behave. Her phone chimed with a message. It was Cass. Leora had given her number to the aunt without thinking, and nothing about this felt like a boundary violation now. The message was a picture of a backdoor lock and a caption. "He did it again, thank you." She replied, "You did it." He reminded, "That is a team." Cass sent back a heart in the color teens choose when they mean it and do not want to seem silly. Word traveled without gossip's teeth in it. People told each other the version they could bear. Some said the call after the funeral had been a trick of towers, an echo, a message scheduled by a grieving mind that had set a reminder on a phone. Some said Eamon was still doing his rounds, making sure pilot lights and pans behaved. The chaplain said he did not know the mechanics of it and did not care, that love gets to serve in whatever uniform it likes. The fire chief said quietly to Leora, "If my number ever lights your board and I am not in a position to help myself, send the crew. I will not be offended if you use my name to get them there faster." It is Wanan. The next week brought the kind of snow that erases the edges of things. Leora worked 3 overnights in a row and learned to sleep in squares of 4 hours like a cat. She took a call from a man who had found his wife on the floor and guided him to count and compress, and the medics arrived before the counting rasped the hope out of his voice. She took a call from a woman who had locked herself in a bathroom because her boyfriend had stopped being gentle, and she kept the woman talking about the photograph on the wall while the officers climbed the stairs 2 at a time. She did not think about the line until it lit again 2 Fridays later at 1 in the morning. She kept her voice clean. 911. Eamon's voice came again, thinner, like a person speaking through a scarf. It said, in a tone part instruction and part apology, "Box of matches in the junk drawer beside the oven. Throw them out." She told Park. Park went. He opened the drawer and found a box that had wicked itself damp and mean. He took it to the back porch and soaked it and binned it, and then came inside and wrote a sticky note for Cass that read, "Your dad told on you." She woke to it and laughed in that shocked way laughter has when it has been given back its license to exist. Not every call was that kind. Once, the line connected, and all Leora could hear was faint wind and the hollow tick of a cooling engine, and she understood, without needing the lieutenant's later confirmation, that this had been the night the station bays opened, and Eamon's truck had been driven back from the long, slow procession, and the engine had clicked in that language. Machines use to admit fatigue. Once, the line carried only a sound, like boots on gravel, exactly 3 steps, then the pause of a man looking at a sky he used to know from a ladder truck. Once, nothing came at all. And still, she stayed on the line the way you stay on a porch after a friend has gone inside, just in case one more sentence needs to come out and walk around in the air. Spring loosened the river. April made the churchyard look less stern. Cass finished school with a concentration that made her teachers write small notes on the bottom of her papers. "You have turned into a person who trusts herself." Leora saw her at the station on an open house Saturday, and the girl hugged her the way nieces do their aunts without asking for the right to be related. They stood under the engine bay's great door and listened to the way small kids treat sirens like musical instruments when given permission. Cass said she sometimes still heard it, the way a voice comes into a room without needing to open the door. She said the voice had told her to bring in the porch rug before a thunderstorm that would have flung it across the block. She said the voice had told her to drink water before her stomach had the language to beg for it. "What do you think it is?" she asked, not demanding that it be a ghost or an algorithm. "I think you live in a county where people answer one another when called," Leora said. "I think sometimes lines open from one room to another because the rooms were built that way by love. I think if we say it out loud too many times, the day will get shy and pretend it never happened. And I think your dad trained his whole body to go when someone needed a sentence, and I do not know what training looks like later." Thanks for watching Allen's To Help Pray. Cass nodded as if she had been offered advice about lifting with her legs, not her back. She put her hands on the engine's bumper like a kid checking the pulse of a whale and whispered thanks in the dull shine where she thought it might carry. The last call came in July, on a night that smelled like cut grass and the electric promise of storm. The board was quiet. Brant had his feet crossed at the ankle, the way he did only after midnight when the county behaved. The line lit. Leora took it with the care of a person accepting a candle in wind. 911. There was no static, no breath, only a single word, perfectly ordinary, soaked in a patience she would remember until the last hour of her life. Enough. "Enough what?" she asked. Back straight, pencil ready. The word came again, a thought set gently on a table. Enough. Then a long exhale, the temperature of a day in which someone has put down a tool they are proud to have used and is ready to wash their hands. She typed the word. She did not send units. She did not mention it to Brant until the end of the hour, when she said it out loud the way you say a number twice to make sure you got it right. He nodded. He threw a cough drop to her like a baseball, and she caught it and laughed because bodies insist on living. There were no more calls after that. The system reassigned numbers as systems do. The board forgot how to glow with that tag. When Leora sat at her desk and the photographs leaned against the monitor made their steady witness, she still sometimes heard the faint tap of a firefighter's gloved hand on a doorframe, the universal signal for ready. She bought a small, heavy key hook for her own kitchen, put it by the back door, and never forgot again. She found that when she walked past the Ridge place on mornings when she needed to see the river before she could trust the day, she would look at the back door and feel not a haunting, not an ache, but the exact rectangular comfort of a thing that had been understood and done. If this kind of thing ever happens where you live, if a phone rings after a set of shoulders in town have lowered themselves to the work of grief, if a name appears on your console that your heart wants to call impossible, do what Leora did. Answer. Stand in the narrow bridge between rooms, ask short questions with soft edges, send help, write down exact words. The world is made of exact words and the work that follows them. Believe nobody and nothing too hard. Let the river decide what is memory and what is rumor. And when the voice finally says enough, let your hands say thank you by resting them, palm down, on the desk you have kept clean so the night can put its weight there for a minute. And if you are sitting in your kitchen with a back door that gets forgetful, say the date out loud to bring the day to heal. Late January 2022. Early April 2022. The hot night in July when rain forgot its manners. Say the town's name so it will remember it has one. Say Amen. Say Cass. Say Leora. Practice the sentence that saved a pan and a pilot light in a teenager who deserved a house that understood locks. Back door locked. Then lock it, then sleep. The county will keep its watch. The river will balance its own ledger. Somewhere, a dispatcher you will never meet will lay a pencil down on a pad with a line drawn through the last open box, a small, perfect check that means this part of the night is finished and the next part may begin. He found a staircase in the lake it still goes up. He saw it when the wind fell off and the lake lay down like glass, a sudden stillness that made every shoreline detail stand at attention. The afternoon sun had taken a step toward evening, yellowed and steady, and the north cove of Lake Lanier went calm enough to show the bones under it. He cut his aluminum skiff to idle and drifted toward the pale shoulder of exposed clay. There, not random at all, a run of stone steps pushed up from green water and kept going into nothing the shore could explain, even and true, as if they still believed a front door was waiting at the top. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2022, after a summer of stingy rain and long afternoons when the heat felt like it had signed a lease. The lake sat northeast of Atlanta, a blue map of drowned hills and red clay coves, and that year it had read its gauge and decided to show some of what history had asked it to forget. Foundations revealed themselves like old teeth. The ghostly lanes of a two-lane road slipped out of the murk and pointed nowhere. Between Bald Ridge and the mouth of 6 Mile Creek, a staircase announced itself and waited for a person with the right kind of attention to see it. Riven Kettering had that kind of attention. 38. A carpenter and part-time rescue diver who liked small engines and the honest work of making broken things carry weight again. He lived in a rental off Pilgrim Mill Road with a dog who had taught herself to sleep through sirens. He was not a romantic, not really. He was the kind of man who listened to what a hinge said when it wasn't being looked at. The lake had been a job and a solace for him since he moved down from the foothills of Tennessee a decade earlier, and on afternoons like this one, he took his old skiff out to idle over the drown. The staircase began 3 steps below the surface, pale rectangles set into the clay, then climbed above waterline, slick with algae, where yesterday had touched and left. 12 risers showed drop. They marched up the bank as if they had no intention of stopping, then continued past where stone ended, the air holding their measure with a confidence that made nothing in Riven's head feel quite steady. He nosed the skiff forward until its snub bow made a soft knock against the lowest dry riser. The hull and the stone talked for a second, low and hollow. He stood, keeping knees loose, eyes at a level where you can decide a thing without pretending it's not, pretending you first. The steps were fieldstone set into a poured bed, careful work from when hands were steadier because nothing had asked them to type yet. He could see where the mortar had let go, hairline by hairline, and where a leaf had chosen to become fossil rather than compost. He stepped out. The rock took his weight with a small, agreeable groan. He climbed, counting aloud the way you do when a rhythm wants to prove it's a law. 7, 8, 9. A wet line at his ankles where he had waded the shallow to push the skiff in. 10, 11, 12. He stopped where stone ended. The sidewalls rose one more course and then gave way to air. Ahead of him, nothing. Above him, more nothing. And yet his right foot, when he slid it forward with the caution of a man who had once fallen through a rotten porch and did not intend to audition for that pain again, found resistance. Not stone, not water. Not empty. A density like stretched cloth, like cold-pressed sugar, like a stare that remembered itself and refused to forget just because the lake had been told to be a lake. He drew his foot back, scalp prickling, breath in a pocket he didn't want to open too fast. He looked around to see if anyone else had been presented this joke. No one. In late September, a Tuesday can make a cove your private chapel. Far out, a pontoon boat moved like a floor with music on it. Closer in, a blue heron had made the stump of an old post into a claim. Riven set his palm above the end of the stone into the air where a banister would be if someone had finished the thought. He felt nothing until he pushed a hair past what he thought was safe. Then he felt a boundary, the exact height of a handrail in a code book he could recite. He smiled despite the way his heart had decided to pick up the tempo. Something here hadn't drowned entirely. Something here had decided to keep going up. He does not scare fast, Riven. He is a man who has gotten into dark water at night, kindly, and come back calmer for it. But he respects a place with a memory. He went back down the 12 risers and climbed into the skiff and sat with his hand on the tiller and let the lake tell him if it wanted him to be braver than his grandmother would approve. The wind was a rumor now. On the far shore, a transformer hummed with the stale sweetness of electricity. He turned the motor off and drifted with his fingers brushing the gunwale and felt for the old current under the new. A loon called once out in the main channel, the syllable bending toward a kind of loneliness that doesn't need an audience. Riven looked back at the steps. The air above the 13th riser shimmered, a trick of light or a rule he hadn't been told yet. He swore softly in the old way that buys you permission to try again. He pulled the skiff onto the red bank, tied it off to a scar of root, and went back up the 12. He did what his hands knew to do. He turned a coin on its edge and rolled it along the last stone. When it tipped forward into air, it did not fall. It sat against nothing, as if pressed to a glass he could not see. He slid it forward with one finger and felt it drag over an edge. He slid his boot after it and met a tread that had weight. He put his full foot down and his bones agreed that physics had not been insulted, only invited to a different kind of party. He brought the other foot up. He stood on the 13th step of something that existed without confessing to the eye. He took one more. 14. He stopped. He is not a fool. He turned to look at the lake, which does not care if you find it holy or treacherous, so long as you understand which mood it is in. The cove held its breath. He stepped backward down the 2 air treads with a caution that felt like a prayer you say without agreeing you're saying it. He stood again on stone that had no arguments and breathed the kind of breath that renters of boats make when the motor coughs once and then forgives you. Lake Lanier carries stories the way clay carries footprints. Old towns lie under it, old churches, the ghost lanes of Old Federal Road. People will tell you about a stalled truck on a fogged bridge and a handprint on the back window after, about divers who won't go down a second time because they looked through a school of crappie and saw a porch swing move. Some of that is what happens when humans leave water to be the keeper of their history. Some of that is people being lonely and needing their fear to wear a costume. Riven carried none of those stories in the silly way. He carried them the practical way. He knew people had been told their land would drown for the good of cities they would never see, and some of those people had said their names into the bank and put rocks one on another to make the land remember. He went home with the staircase in his notebook and in his knees. He did not say the shape of it to the bartender at the place on Brown's Bridge, who called everybody chief. He did not post a photo because the lake punishes people who turn it into spectacle. He slept badly and woke before his alarm and made coffee meaner than necessary and drove back with a coil of thin rope and a chalk box and the tape measure he used when perfection had to be part of the bill. Morning Lake, blue as breath. The skiff skittered over wind ruffles and slid into the cove willing. He tied a chalk line at the last stone and played it out up the air, marking nothing with blue dust that caught in nothing and hung there like a trick. He laughed once, quietly. He measured riser height with the tape and found consistency that would have made a county inspector nod. He tied a loop in the rope and lowered it down the near face of the steps. The loop sat against an invisible edge and held, not tight, not loose, as if politely told to wait. Half an hour went by that way. Numbers, angles. The carpenter in him building a drawing that would keep his fear inside its lines. When he finished, he sat with his back against the sidewall and let his head find the cool of stone that had learned shade. The world stepped closer. From somewhere he could not triangulate came a sound that reminded him of a bicycle bell rung just once. In politeness, he stood. The sound did not come again. He walked down the 12 and waited on the shoreline while the lake decided whether to ignore him or to grant him more. A woman called from the top of the red bank. Riven looked up. She was tall and rangy, mid-40s, wearing the kind of straw hat that makes a person look like they know how to move in weather. She carried a camera with a strap that had been repaired twice and a notebook bulging with the kind of paper that did not come out of printers. She introduced herself with a grin that answered questions he had not asked. Mara Clary. She ran a small outfit that mapped drowned towns and grave relocations for counties that cared to admit their forgetting. She had a copy of the Army Corps' old charts and a habit of showing up where the lake loaned the present to the past. "I've been told you've got steps," she said, "and that they keep going up." He wanted to ask who had been talking. He wanted not to have his name in a stranger's mouth. But she put her hand on the sidewall like a careful person says hello to an old horse, and the way her face took in what she saw made him feel less alone in his own seeing. He nodded. He told her his name and the number of air treads he'd let himself trust. She whistled low. "Lanier tells on itself every few years," she said, eyes on the shimmer above the 13th. "But I haven't seen it do this. Fieldstone, that would have been a front walk probably. Or the stairs to a porch. You can tell from the way these aren't as steep as church steps. And there would have been a dog who slept halfway up until someone came home at supper." "Everyone says that about any porch," he said, smiling despite himself. "Only because it keeps being true," she said, and laughed like a sound the cove had missed. They measured together, she took photos, he held a stick out over the air risers and watched the end bounce against nothing. They left offerings the old way. He peeled the paper off a peppermint and set it on the third stone step. She untied a strip of blue cloth from her hat and tied it to the root that held his skiff's rope. The lake, if it acknowledged that at all, did not show it. She opened her notebook to a page where she had copied in neat letters the names and dates of households taken when the valley was flooded in the early 1960s. 2 farms had sat on this spur, the Sumter place, the Jory place. Sumter had 5 children and a clean way with fence lines. Jory was famous for a Sunday table and a sour temperament the rest of the week. The county had cut checks and called it a necessity. The stairs could have been either family's. But on the sidewall, low near the 5th riser, they found a mark cut into mortar with a nail or a stubborn penknife. A letter. "Jay, you think Jory," she said. "Or June," he said. "Or Josephine. Or a boy who didn't get to grow into his handwriting rights, their first initial into any stone that isn't busy." The lake made a small sound against the hull, a shrug. They came back the next day, and the next after that. In the afternoons, teenagers on rental jet skis came doing grammar the water did not admire. In the mornings, a heron watched like a magistrate. Once, a man in a bass boat cut his engine and drifted nearer and asked if the invisible was real or a trick. And when Riven told him the truth, he raised his cap and said, "Well then," and idled away because some facts want to be left alone to keep being facts. On the 5th day, just after noon, when the light loses some of its slant and the lake starts its long exhale toward evening, the air changed. Riven was on the 14th invisible tread, Mara 2 below on stone, the rope tied at his ankle as if that kind of thing would help. He felt a pressure move across his shin like a child's study of a newel post. The hair on his forearms declared a vote. He looked up. Above him, a faint dark line hung in the bright. A lintel, if you wanted to pretend to see one. A line where a door might have decided to sit if it still meant to. He lifted his hand slowly and let it hover. It met resistance at the height where a latch would be if people had followed the same measurements here as they did in town. He pressed a fraction and felt the air give. Not much, not enough to invite him, only enough to say, "I know what you were asking for," and no. He withdrew his hand. He did not try again. He went back down and sat on the 6th stone step and put his elbows on his knees and let his head go heavy in the way of a man who knows the difference between a closed door and an answer. "Not today," Mara said, not unkindly. "Doesn't mean never." A storm ran around the rim of the lake that night and forgot how to come down. The next morning broke clean and noisy, with birds relieved to be right about the Sunday. When they returned to the steps, the peppermint was gone. The strip of cloth whispered against the root when the wind remembered it. On the 4th stone riser, a line had been drawn in the red dust by a finger that had not belonged to wind. 4 short lines, 1 long. The way a person keeps track of days when they are doing a job no one else is counting, they looked at each other like people who have been included in a conversation without earning it. Mara wrote down the marks in that tidy, practical hand. Riven climbed to 14 again and did not press the air where the latch would be. He listened instead. It is an old trick. The more you don't demand to hear, the more willing a place is to say its piece. Somewhere above him, at the end of the invisible run, a sound came faint, almost an opinion. The scrape of a chair, foot against a wooden floor. Once, then a breath, remarkably ordinary, let out by someone who was done with a small effort and is pleased to have finished. He let his knees bend and went back down, step by careful step. The county put out a notice, polite as a church lady, asking people not to climb anything that felt like absence. A man from the Corps came by with a clipboard and a caution that did not include humor and told them to rope the place from the bank. They tied a line and left it slack enough to be ignored by whatever needed to come and go. Mara logged coordinates and photographs and the exact color of the lichens on the sidewall. Riven made a drawing of the steps that showed the air ones the way you show trust, with dotted lines and a note that says, "As found." Word spread anyway. It always does when to leave a thing alone would be the more complicated form of love. A grandmother came and watched from the shade and told her granddaughter a story about the summer her brother rode a bike into a field that is now part of the lake and fell and did not cry, because corn leaves will cut you if you give them. An audience. A man in a Braves cap stood for a long time with his hands in the back pockets of his jeans and didn't tell anyone why his eyes kept the gloss they kept. A boy clapped once and apologized, and then asked if the staircase sounded like anything, and when Riven told him about the scrape and the breath, the boy looked toward the place where a door might be and whispered, "Thank you," like a student to a teacher who has handed out permission slips to freedom. On a Wednesday morning in early October, the lake rose 2 inches. The first stone step went green again. The 12th stayed dry. Riven set his palm to the sidewall as he had begun to do without design and said the names of the months out loud as if they were a key. Mara arrived late, hair in a bandana printed with little cranes, a thermos in one hand and a sheet of onion skin paper in the other, the thin kind that takes pencil and lets the stone's texture come up through. She rubbed the J, the nail-cut letter, and the tally marks. When she lifted the paper, the letter and the lines looked like a message written by someone whose words had to be rationed. She tucked the rubbing into her notebook with a care Riven recognized as kin to prayer. By noon, clouds built into a boast. Mara packed her camera because electric things deserve not to be insulted by weather. Riven untied the rope at his ankle and coiled it with the absent-minded competence of someone who likes ropes for the way they make order out of risk. The air above the 14th step felt different. Cooler, somehow. Denser. He looked up and wanted more than he would have admitted the week before to see something acknowledge him. Not a face, not a figure, an idea. The lake refused. It kept to its rights. Before the storm broke, a small group arrived in silence. Not tourists, not thrill seekers. People in good shoes that did not belong to docks. A woman in a navy blazer. A man whose tie had been loosened by degrees and had stopped at 3. An older woman with a cane that looked like it had been carved by someone who understood trees better than money. They stood on the bank above the line and watched the steps like people watching someone figure skate after having once skated the same routine 3 decades ago and remembering what the body used to hold. The older woman spoke first, to the stone, not to the living. "You kept it," she said. "You stubborn thing. I told them you would." She introduced herself when Riven climbed down to the bank with his curiosity plainly showing. Ada Sumter Jory. Not a marriage, she was quick to clarify, but a habit of names borrowed and kept. Her father had been a Sumter, her mother a Jory by necessity and grievance. She had been 10 when the men from the government came and put stakes on the hill and told her they were measuring to make the river useful. She had been 14 when the kitchen was dismantled and stored in a relative's shed, and the porch chairs were put on a truck without the porch. She had been 15 when the lake finally climbed to the 7th stair and the dogs refused to sleep where they had always slept and had to learn ground new as $1. "My granddaddy set those stones," she said, chin lifting toward the steps. He knew the grade by eye. House stood there. She pointed at the air, ran long that way. Kitchen at the back, where mornings were honest. Stairs to the sleeping rooms tucked in right of the door. He told me we build stairs for coming and going and for waiting. That last part is where the world gets the math wrong. She cleared her throat once, a small thing that meant a larger thing had moved through it. "My brother wrote his letter J in the mortar before it set," she said, and smiled fully for the first time. He was 5 and mad because he had not been allowed to carry a stone and needed to have done something the porch would remember. They watched the lake together as it considered which forenoon belonged to which afternoon. Mara showed Ada the rubbing, and Ada put her palm on the paper like a hand over a baby's sleeping flank. "He stayed mean," she said of Jory, but without any real heat. But he loved that stare. Sat halfway up when he had nothing to do and the weather had nothing to argue about. Played that little bell you keep hearing because he liked the neatness of a sound that stops when you take your finger off it. The storm arrived, they covered what needed covering, the skiff rocked and complained, and then remembered it had been in worse moods and calmed. The rain washed the red dust off the risers and gave them back their gray. The air cooled like a head turning on a pillow to the comfortable side. Ada walked down to the second step and touched it like the forehead of a child with a fever breaking. "Enough," she said to the rain, to the year, to the air that had learned to hold treads. In the weeks that followed, the staircase did what durable things do when they decide to belong to more than one story. It kept being itself. The lake rose and smudged the lower steps and then pulled back like a long breath returned. Riven kept coming because he had begun to like the feeling of leaving a place better than he found it by doing nothing but listening the way a well-made chair listens when a tired person sits. Mara wrote a piece for the County Historical Society that began with the sentence, "There are places we drown and places that refuse." Ada came twice more and told the stair her brother's best and worst. And once, on a bright Sunday, when the buzz of outboards sounded like cicadas pretending to be important, she brought a tin of biscuits and left one on the 3rd step because her mother would have called it manners. On a morning in November, the air thin and brisk, frost like pale sugar on shaded clay, Riven came alone. The lake had taken back an inch, the first 2 steps glowed green. He stood at the foot and waited the way you learn to wait when you've been given more than you asked and are smart enough not to get greedy. The wind came off the water and put its fingers through his hair with a familiarity he hadn't earned. Above the 14th tread, the line where a lintel would be shivered and then settled. He put his hand out at the height of a latch and did not press. "Thank you," he said to nothing and to something. He went home and made lunch and fixed a neighbor's sagging cabinet and walked his dog in the long honey of 4 o'clock. He slept that night without the lake climbing the stairs of his thoughts. He dreamed he was sanding a handrail he could not see and woke with the particular ache in his forearm that tells a man he did a good day's work in the world that matters and the one that does not need him but lets him in anyway. If you go out to Lake Lanier on a fall day after a long dry, when the wind has the courtesy to lie down and let the surface polish itself, you can find the cove if you know who to ask and you promise out loud not to bring a ladder. The staircase will be there, stepping up from water into air with the patience of a body that has learned not to argue with time. You can put your boot on the 12th stone and your breath on your rib cage and decide if you will push your foot forward into the space where the 13th waits. If you do, it will hold. Not because wonder owes you, but because someone set a measure here with care, and because sometimes the world keeps an old promise in a new element. Say the year out loud when you find it. 2022. Say the place by its names, Lanier and the valley it drowned. Say the people if you know them, Sumter, Jory. Say the letter on the wall, J. Say the noise a bicycle bell makes when a brother likes attention and the porch has all afternoon. If you leave something, make it small, a ribbon, a peppermint. A finger laid gently in dust to make a line that will blow away with the next weather. Walk back down, let your knees do what they were built to do. Put your hand on the sidewall the way you would on a friend's shoulder when leaving them on their own porch in the dark to listen to the crickets. The staircase will keep going up whether or not your eyes can follow it. It will keep its measure in the air. The lake will rise and cover the lower treads and then fall back and confess again. Boats will hum. Herons will judge. A woman in a straw hat will rub letters onto paper, and a man with a dog who sleeps through sirens will coil rope and listen. And somewhere under the calm skin of the cove, where red clay holds onto everything it can hold, a front door you cannot see will stay shut and not unkindly, practicing the hardest kind of hospitality there is, offering you a way to ascend and a way to wait, and trusting you to know which one belongs to you today. Her phone pinged at a grave with her name. The notification bloomed on her screen the moment her shoes left the gravel and slid onto the soft path between moss-dark stones. A small bell chime, bright as glass. A banner at the top. You have arrived, Eden E. Hale. The words sat there as calmly as a weather app, as if the city had decided to label her the way it labels a bridge or a square. The place was Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Spanish moss hung in long, steady sentences from the live oaks. The river kept its secrets behind the bluff and breathed like a sleeping room. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in early November, the air cool enough to make her wish for sleeves and warm enough to forgive her for forgetting them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Idoni Hale, 28. She worked in visitor services at a small maritime museum upriver, the kind of job that made her memorize the angles of ships and the dates when storms came ashore. She liked fonts and quiet, and the sound salt makes drying on stone. She was visiting Bonaventure because her friend Anson had flown in from Minneapolis for a long weekend, and the two of them liked places that let you feel your breath in your mouth. The year was 2021. Phones knew where you were within decent intimacy. Some headstones wore small plaques with codes that asked to be scanned and promised a story. They had parked on Bonaventure Road under an oak that had learned to be older than most houses. The sky was simple, a clean coin of light. The volunteer at the office had given them a paper map and a soft-voiced list of locations worth the walk if you wanted your day to hold. Look for the little angels facing east. Find the section where the camellias keep blooming against instruction. There's a family plot that feels like a room you shouldn't step into without knocking. No one mentioned a notification. Idoni stared at her phone. The banner did not give a location like Section F or Plot 31. It was the same tag her calendar used when she arrived at work or home. You have arrived, Idoni Hale. As if she were a place. As if the grave were her. Anson leaned toward the screen and squinted. He was tall and light-footed, a teacher of high school literature who carried poems in his pockets like receipts. He read the banner and then her face and made a small arranging motion with his hands, the way he does when he wants to place humor where fright is trying to sit. That's a bug, he said, not unkindly. Or a geofence you made and forgot. Did you tell your phone to remind you to be yourself today? She clicked the banner to see where the phone thought she belonged. A map opened, a blue dot pulsed with the steady patience of a small heartbeat. A gray pin sat 100 feet east in a section labeled McAllister. The pop-up bubble above the pin read Ideni Hale in the same unsentimental font. She did not have a virtual contact called a cemetery. She had not created a reminder to arrive at her own name. The phone had decided the path curled between stones with dates that made you speak them out loud, because numbers are easier to hold when they come through the mouth. 1873, 1920, 2009. The Oaks leaned as if sold on the idea that the living need rehearsal space. Anson spoke a tour fact about a poet who loved this place and whose plaque visitors touch in a small, quick superstition. Idoni nodded because liking facts is a way of staying steady. Her pocket shook again. Another chime, the same banner. You have arrived. Ideni Hale. She breathed the way the yoga teacher on the internet tells you to. In through a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 6. They followed the path east until the bluff opened its shoulder and let the wind test their sleeves. The section ahead was a little higher, a little more sure of itself. A plot enclosed by low stone, dressed in ivy, sat beneath a live oak that looked like a table that had decided to grow legs. In the center stood a headstone gray as rain, taller than Idoni's shoulder. The name at the top held Ideni Hale. She stopped. You might have stopped too. Her name was not common. Her mother had found it in a book of Old English names and liked the way it sounded like a promise made under a tree. She had never met another Ideni. To see the letters in this order on stone felt like stepping into a movie where you have lines you did not audition for. Anson's hand found her elbow without a show of it. He had the sense not to say, wow, or are you kidding? He stood with her and let the river finish a sentence neither of them had started. The dates carved below the name were the first clean relief, 1974 to 2014, not hers. A woman 2 decades older, gone 7 years now. Under the dates, a line that read as Keeper of the Keys. The stone carried a small oval of glazed photo, a face with hair tucked back, eyes steady, a glint of a key ring at the edge of the frame. The oval was rubbed to a shine from fingers, the way love polishes small things while refusing to say it is love. On the right-hand corner of the stone, someone had bolted one of the new plaques with its little square of patterns. Scan to learn more. People who love story cannot resist a square that holds one. Ideni lifted her phone and let the camera see. A link opened without asking for anything. A page built by a memorial service company bloomed. At the top, the name again. Below, a small biography. A life lived with habits, upright and kind. A childhood in Chatham County. A long run as cemetery sexton. The last line read in a voice that felt like a woman sitting on a step with a mug and a warning and a grin. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. While she read, the phone hummed again. Not a banner this time. A little circle pulsing at the top of the screen, the way maps announce a place with enthusiasm. The circle flashed once, then settled. Ideni swiped down to see the source, a calendar reminder with no category. White, titled simply, Arrived. Location, here. She had not written that. The phone, perhaps, had decided the day needed a label, or the small plaque had more to it than the page admitted. Anson said the woman in the photo had librarian eyes. He meant that as a compliment. He pointed at the key ring. He said his grandmother had been a keeper of the keys at a church in North Dakota, and those women know where every grief sits at every hour, the way a night janitor knows which chairs spit gum and which ones sigh. They stood a while. People walked past in respectful silence, guided by a docent's voice that held just enough theater to keep 15 people from wandering into their own daydreams. Spanish moss moved like thought repeating itself. A flake of light rose off the river and fell back as if it had changed its mind about being air. It would have been a good story already finding your own name on stone, a phone that had the audacity to tell you you had arrived, but something else decided to be true. A little tone sounded from the phone, the way sounds do when an app you forgot you had decides to help. It was the noise her AirDrop made when someone nearby wanted to share a photo at inopportune moments. The screen shifted to a dialogue. A file offered to send itself to her. The sender name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The file name read Keys. Anson leaned in and made his face calm. "Decline," he said gently, "because strangers in public places with quick hands make tricks, and both of them work in museums and have seen every version of the human habit of testing boundaries." She hovered. Decline would be wise. Accept would be a dare. She pressed accept because sometimes you let stories finish what they start. The file downloaded. It was not a photo, it was an audio file, a minute 42 in length. The waveform showed it wasn't silence. She tilted the phone toward her own ear instead of speaker because you don't open a voice in a cemetery loud unless the voice has earned the right. Static first, then the sound of wind combing something thin, then a woman's voice, the age of a woman, who tells tools where they belong and expects cooperation. The voice said, "Dry as a towel and warm as a summer kitchen. If you are standing over me, child, and your name is mine, you can help me keep my promises. Put your phone on the stone and leave it be a minute. It will tell you where to stand next." Anson's eyebrows did a small jazz riff and then tried to behave. "Okay," he said softly, a word that meant, "I am here and I am not going to ruin this with cleverness." Idony set the phone on the flat top of the headstone the way the voice had instructed. The screen slid into its lock. Her reflection replaced her. The oval photo looked past her shoulder the way old photos always do. She counted in her head as a way to keep the childish fear of being tricked from standing up and knocking the ritual with its elbow. 50, 60, 78. The phone buzzed once, she lifted it. The map opened of its own accord. The blue dot had moved nothing. The gray pin had changed. It labeled another grave 30 yards north with a name neither of them had seen on the paper map. Rosin Hale. A second name. Another Hale. The first name was Welsh and not common here. They went because the day had asked enough times to be answered polite. The second stone stood lower, more modest. The granite, a color you could never find on purpose if you looked in a catalog. The dates were older, 1931 to 1999. The epitaph read, "She kept the gate lighted," and under that, in smaller letters, so faint you could only see them when the cloud put its hand over the sun, a line, Rosine was born. Rosine Idris. She married into Hale and stayed. Tell my niece if she comes through here that I see her when I count keys. I am not anybody's niece, Idini said aloud, and then took a breath because she heard the defensiveness squirreled underneath. I mean, not hers. You might be more people's niece than you know, Anson said gently, a man who had grown up with uncles who weren't uncles and yet were more family than the kind that wears your face. They stood while the wind added a signature to the bottom of the page of the day. The river put its shoulder against the bank and leaned. The phone did not ping again for a while. A cardinal went from one branch to another with the purposeful speed of a person who knows where the parts are stored. A group of teenagers trailed an auntie through the lanes, popping gum in a respectful way, which is a regional miracle. Idony looked up Rosin on the cemetery's database because when your heart gets odd, facts make a braid to hold on to. The database was one of those volunteer-built websites that carry the tone of a potluck where everyone brings a dish so exact it shames you for choosing salad. Rosin's entry was thorough. Born Rhonda Valley, came across with parents as a child, settled in Chatham County, married one Mr. Hale, worked checklist after checklist for the electrical union office, sang alto in church with the patience of an anvil, survived by no children, preceded by older brothers, all gone. Niece mentioned in an obituary in 1999 with no name given. Anson made a sound that meant the story had wiped its hands on his shirt and was ready to cook. The phone chimed once more, now with the tone her museum app uses when a beacon in an exhibit hands you a fact. She had turned beacons off last month because being interrupted by history while in history felt a bit like a stage whisper in a quiet theater. She had not turned beacons back on. The screen read, "A note is waiting." A map pinpointed the little brick building the cemetery uses as a workshop for the grounds crew. A path drew itself in blue between the Hales and the shop, like a string in a child's game. They went because keys that ask to be found deserve not to rust, The door to the shop was propped with a cinder block, the way doors are propped everywhere when the weather learns to be useful. A radio played a station that chose old soul and occasional baseball score updates. No one was at the counter. A bell stood there anyway, the kind that rings a sound like a glass penny. Anson rang it because he likes participating in obvious rituals. A man in his 50s with a badge that read August came in from the back, wiping his hands on a rag that had earned its keep. "You folks need a map?" he asked, then took a longer look at their faces and revised. "Or a minute." "We were by the hailstones," Idony said, and watched the way a man looks when a rhyme finds his ear and tells him it cares. August nodded. "Course you were," he said. "I keep an envelope for that family. Been waiting on who it's waiting on." He reached under the counter, where drawers have learned to hold what should not be lost, and brought up a large yellow envelope with a blue paperclip that had rusted a little by choosing weather. The envelope had 3 words on the front in tidy block letters. For the next Idony, heat went across her face like an honest light. August saw it and stilled. He handed her the envelope the way people hand one another babies, meaning well and moving slow. She opened it with her thumb. Inside, 3 items. A small brass key, old, not ornate, with teeth filed like a decision. A folded sheet torn from a spiral notebook, edges soft with years. And a wallet-sized photo of a woman in a blue work shirt with a name patch and a grin you could feel on your back like afternoon Sunday. The patch read, "Idony." The face belonged to the woman on the first stone. The note was written in blue ballpoint in a hand that pressed harder than paper deserves. It read, "Simple. For the next Idony in this county who can hear me the way a key hears a lock. My niece is out there." She won't say yes to the word niece because words are stubborn. She'll need to open the box in the old mausoleum we keep for tools and favors. The key is for the small door on the left. Lift on the latch while you turn. The box has what belongs to her and me and her grandmother. If she is standing at my stone with a phone, she will know that I know. Don't bring a crowd. Bring one friend who reads instructions with his eyes. Leave the key when you are done. We can count without hands here. "I'm not someone's niece," she said again, and heard how the sentence grew less certain with practice. Her mother's family tree began and ended in a different state. A line of women who told polite lies to spare one another the sharp edges and did their grief in broom closets. Her father had not survived long enough to name distant relations. He had left behind a bent screwdriver and a smell that her body still could find when a day asked. Anson's hand found the counter in a quick pat, like checking for keys as you leave the house. "You don't have to be a niece to be the person meant to do a thing," he said. "But also you might, and it might not matter how that happened." August tapped the counter twice, a habit that sounded like a yes. "The small left door," he said. "People never see it. Take the path behind the office and go right at the angel with the missing hand. The mausoleum is the little brick one that looks polite. The left door sticks the way a lie sticks to a room. Do what the note said, lift and turn." They went back into the light. The blue string on the map did not bother now to draw. The path knew their feet. The angel with the missing hand stood where the volunteer had said, "Angels stand, face east," blank expression that suggested she had witnessed every century and found nothing quite bad enough to frown at yet. The brick mausoleum waited with that small pride buildings have when they know they are not the grandest on the block, but are the one that does the job without complaint. The left door looked like a panel added later. The brass latch had the smoothness that comes of being touched by people who mean to get work done. Idony slid the key in, the teeth caught, and then thought better of it. She lifted the latch with her other hand and turned. The lock gave. The door opened 6 inches and stopped, ticked by a wooden wedge that had been insinuated at the bottom by someone who had not wanted the